In the year 636 AD, on the banks of the Yarmouk River, the mighty Byzantine Empire, direct heir to the glory of Rome, assembled the largest army the East had seen in generations. It was a force of nations, a tide of steel and gold, armored and certain of its power, summoned with a single, crushing purpose to uproot a new and audacious faith that had surged, like a sandstorm, from the depths of the Arabian desert. It was the clash of a 1,000-year-old empire against a nascent revolution. But they had not reckoned with one man, a tactical genius known as the Sword of Allah, who, upon beholding that formidable horde, saw not an invincible army, but a clumsy giant with feet of clay, about to be lured into the deadliest trap in ancient history. The legend of the Battle of Yarmouk is the story of how intelligence, speed, and an unshakable faith can dismantle brute force. Khalid ibn al-Walid did not simply defeat the Byzantine army, he dissected, bled, and annihilated it. His genius lay not in a frontal clash, but in a series of brilliant decisions that turned the enemy's every advantage into a fatal weakness. He neutralized their overwhelming numerical superiority through a masterful choice of battlefield, transforming the terrain into a natural cauldron with no escape. And then, he unleashed his most brilliant creation, an elite cavalry reserve, a surgical tool to exploit the giant's every mistake and every vulnerability. This is the epic of a desert David who, with a sling of strategy and speed, brought down an imperial Goliath. It is the chronicle of how an undefeated commander, at the head of an army of underdogs united by faith, outwitted a multinational empire plagued by division. The Battle of Yarmouk was not just a collision of armies, it was the collision of two worlds, of two ways of making war, and at the end of 6 days of blood and sand, victory would not go to the largest, but to the smartest. This is the story of how 40,000 Arabs, led by a genius, not only won a battle, but changed the map of the world forever. At the head of the Muslim forces was Khalid ibn al-Walid, a name that inspired as much fear in his enemies as it did inspiration in his men. Nicknamed by the Prophet Muhammad himself as the Sword of Allah, he was an undefeated commander, a master of mobile warfare, and a genius of battlefield psychology. Although nominally under the command of Abu Ubaidah, it was Khalid's strategic vision and aggressive leadership that unified the scattered Muslim armies in Syria into a single cohesive force. His army, of between 25,000 and 40,000 warriors, was a light, incredibly mobile force, bound by a religious fervor that made them nearly immune to fear. They were hardened veterans, ready to die for their cause. Facing them stood the Leviathan, the might of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Byzantine army was a massive multinational force, with estimates ranging from 80,000 to an improbable 150,000 men. It was a coalition of Byzantines, Slavs, Franks, Armenians, and Christian Arabs. An impressive display of the empire's ability to draw troops from all its corners. Its spearhead was the feared heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, human tanks armored from head to toe, whose charge could shatter any infantry line. On paper, their superiority in numbers, equipment, and organization was simply overwhelming. It seemed a force designed to wipe Khalid's army off the map. But the giant's imposing complexity was, in fact, its fatal weakness. The Byzantine army lacked a unified soul. The command was divided and riddled with conflict. Vahan, an Armenian Re, was the commander-in-chief, but he had to contend with the intrigues and distrust of other generals like Theodore Tritherius and the Christian Arab leader, Jabala. Communication was poor, orders were slow to be executed, and internal rivalries made a coordinated strategy nearly impossible. They trusted blindly in the brute force of their numbers and their traditional tactics, completely underestimating the cohesion, speed, and unified leadership of the Arab force before them. The chessboard, chosen with diabolical cunning by Khalid, was the plain beside the Yarmouk River. At first glance, it seemed a conventional battlefield, but in reality, it was a geographical trap. The plain was flanked to the west, south, and north by deep, almost impassable ravines and river gorges. Khalid positioned his army in such a way that these natural features acted as his flanks, completely denying the Byzantines the ability to use their overwhelming numerical superiority to encircle him. The only viable route for a large-scale retreat was a single Roman bridge to the west, the Bridge of Waqsa. Khalid had not just chosen where to fight, He had chosen where the Byzantine army was going to die. Khalid's stroke of genius, the innovation that would allow him to counter the giant's brute force, was not a static formation, but a dynamic idea. The creation of the immobile guard, al-Mutaharrika. Khalid personally selected the absolute elite of his cavalry, some 4,000 horsemen, to form a strategic reserve under his direct command. This unit was not assigned to any flank or to the center. Its sole purpose was to be a rapid reaction force, a surgical scalpel that could be deployed in minutes to any critical point on the battlefield. It could reinforce a collapsing defense, launch a surprise counterattack, or exploit a breach in the enemy line. It was the perfect antidote to a larger but much slower enemy. The two armies camped opposite each other for months, in a tense calm before the storm that would decide the fate of the Middle East. The Byzantines, confident in their numbers, hoped to wear the Arabs down. Khalid, confident in his strategy, awaited the perfect moment to spring his trap. The coming battle would not be a simple test of strength, but a clash between mass and movement, between tradition and innovation. If you want to discover how a military genius used a cavalry reserve to dismantle an army 4 times his size, subscribe and activate notifications, because the masterclass of the Sword of Allah is about to begin. The battle, which lasted 6 grueling days, began with the predictable fury of the Byzantine giant. On the first day, Vahan launched a massive attack with 1/3 of his infantry, hoping to crush the Muslim line with a single hammer blow. The Arab center and right wing, outnumbered, began to buckle under the relentless pressure. For a moment, it seemed that brute force would prevail, but it was then that Khalid unleashed his secret weapon for the first time. Personally leading his mobile guard, he charged into the flank of the advancing Byzantine infantry, halting their momentum and allowing his own lines to stabilize and counterattack. The first test had been passed. The following days settled into a brutal pattern. The Byzantines launched massive, coordinated assaults, using their heavy infantry and cataphracts to try to break the Arab defenses. On several occasions, especially on the 4th day, their charges nearly succeeded, pushing back the Muslim wings and sowing panic. But at every critical moment, when defeat seemed imminent, Khalid's mobile guard would appear like a desert mirage. They charged, fell back, and charged anew, acting as a fire brigade rushing from one point on the front to another, extinguishing the flames of crisis, relieving pressure, and giving their comrades time to regroup. Khalid's system was working. Frustration began to spread through the Byzantine camp. After 4 days of brutal fighting and thousands of casualties, they had failed to achieve a decisive breakthrough. Morale, once sky-high, began to waver. The deep divisions in the high command, which had been dormant, resurfaced with virulence. The lack of unified leadership translated into increasingly poorly coordinated attacks and growing indecision. While Khalid, with his mobile guard, could react to any threat in minutes, the Byzantines took hours to deliberate, adjust their strategy, and transmit new orders through their massive and complex chain of command. The giant, slow and confused, was losing the battle's rhythm. Khalid, a master of psychological warfare, felt the change in the wind. He saw the hesitation in his enemy and knew the time to shift from defense to offense was approaching. The 5th day was a relative lull, a day of tense calm as both sides recovered their strength. The Byzantines, desperate, attempted to negotiate a truce, a clear sign of their weakened resolve. Khalid refused it. He did not want a truce. He wanted total annihilation. He knew his opponent's spirit was broken and that he needed just one more blow, a coup de grace, to bring the entire edifice crashing down. The 6th and final day dawned with an omen. A strong sandstorm began to blow from the south, directly into the faces of the Byzantine soldiers. The wind howled, blinding the men with dust and sand, reducing visibility and creating an apocalyptic atmosphere. For the Byzantines, it was a disaster. For Khalid, it was a sign from heaven, the moment he had been waiting for, the perfect cover for his final maneuver. He gathered his commanders and gave them a simple, chilling order. Today, there would be no defense. Today, it would be an all-out attack. With the sandstorm as his ally, Khalid launched his entire infantry in a general offensive along the entire front. The Byzantines, surprised, blinded, and demoralized, fought desperately, but the momentum was now with the Muslims. While the frontal combat pinned the Byzantine army in place, Khalid gathered the entirety of his mobile guard, now reinforced with other horsemen, to execute the maneuver that would decide the war and change the world. It was the moment of supreme audacity, the move that would make him an immortal legend. Personally leading his elite cavalry, Khalid undertook a wide, swift ride, completely circling the Byzantine left flank, which was busy fighting the Arab infantry. Shielded by the sandstorm, his movement went completely unnoticed. They rode like desert phantoms, not towards the enemy's flank, but far beyond it, towards their rear. Their target was not a regiment or a legion, but the single point that guaranteed the total annihilation of the Byzantine army, the Waqsa Bridge, their only escape route. Khalid's cavalry reached the bridge and slaughtered the small garrison defending it. In an instant, the trap had snapped shut. The Byzantine army, with its 100,000 men, was now completely enveloped, caught in the cauldron Khalid had chosen 6 days earlier. The news of the bridge's capture spread like wildfire through the Byzantine ranks. At the same time, their left flank, now attacked from the rear by Khalid's cavalry, finally collapsed. Panic, contained for days, erupted in a wave of uncontrollable terror. The Byzantine army broke. Discipline evaporated and cohesion vanished. Formations disintegrated into a mass of terrified men, thinking only of flight. But there was nowhere to flee. When they tried to retreat to the west, they found their path blocked by Khalid's cavalry at the bridge. Trapped with the Muslim army advancing relentlessly from the front and the deep, impassable ravines at their flanks and rear, the retreat turned into a massacre on a biblical scale. Thousands of Byzantine soldiers, in their desperation, tried to climb the cliffs or cross the gorges, only to fall to their deaths at the bottom. Others were cut down by the advancing Arab infantry. Khalid's cavalry acted as the anvil, while the rest of his army was the hammer. The carnage was total. The largest army the empire had assembled in the east was systematically exterminated, not in a battle, but in a hunt. When the sun set on the 6th day, the field of Yarmouk was a vast cemetery. The Byzantine army had ceased to exist. Khalid's victory was absolute, a masterpiece of patience, strategy, and audacity. He had used the terrain to neutralize numbers, his mobile guard to control the battle's tempo, and a brilliant encirclement maneuver to seal his enemy's fate. The underdog had not just defeated the giant, he had erased it from the face of the earth. The sword of Allah had fulfilled his promise. In 6 days, he had broken the back of Byzantine power in the Levant for good. The battle had not just been won. One of the most decisive and strategically perfect victories in all of military history had been achieved. The world had changed, and the architect of that change was a desert general who saw in a battlefield not just a place to fight, but a canvas upon which to paint his masterpiece of annihilation. The figures from the day after the battle are a testament to the scale of the annihilation. The Byzantine army in Syria was not simply defeated, it was erased from existence. Although exact numbers are difficult to verify, estimates of Byzantine losses are staggering, reaching over 70,000 men killed, whether in combat, in the chaotic retreat, or by falling from the ravines. In contrast, Muslim casualties were incredibly low, with only 3,000 to 4,000 warriors fallen. The disproportion speaks not of a close-fought battle, but of a methodical execution and a controlled slaughter. The fate of the Byzantine commanders was as grim as that of their army. Vahan, the commander-in-chief, likely died in the battle, though some sources suggest he fled to a monastery. Theodore Tritherius was also killed in the carnage. With their leaders dead and their army destroyed, imperial power in the region evaporated overnight. There was no significant military force left in Syria capable of opposing the Muslim advance. Khalid's victory was so complete that it left nothing for his enemies to regroup or rebuild. For the Muslim forces, the victory was a divine confirmation of their cause and an unprecedented morale boost. They seized immense spoils from the Byzantine camp, including weapons, armor, and riches that would equip their armies for future conquests. Khalid ibn al-Walid, already a legend, achieved a near-mythical status. He had accomplished what seemed impossible, proving that the new faith could not only survive, but could defeat the greatest superpower of the known world. The gate to Syria and beyond was now wide open. The Battle of Yarmouk is, without a doubt, one of the most decisive battles in human history. Its most significant political and military consequence was the permanent end of Byzantine rule in the Levant. For 700 years, The region had been part of the Greco-Roman and Christian world. In 6 days, that legacy was erased. Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon passed irreversibly into the control of the Rashidun Caliphate. The Byzantine Empire would never recover from this catastrophic loss, and the door for the Islamic conquest of Egypt and North Africa was left wide open, forever altering the geopolitical and religious map of the world. For the nascent Islamic world, Yarmouk became the foundational myth of its expansion. It was the victory that proved, to themselves and to the world, that they were not merely a raid of desert nomads, but a new and formidable world power. The battle was seen as proof of divine favor, a sign that their mission to expand the faith was destined for success. It cemented Khalid ibn al-Walid's reputation as one of the greatest military geniuses of all time, a strategist on par with Alexander the Great or Hannibal, and his tactics would be studied and emulated by Muslim commanders for centuries. From a military standpoint, the battle was a masterclass that redefined warfare in the region. Khalid's creation and use of the mobile guard was a revolutionary tactical innovation, demonstrating the power of a mobile, flexible reserve against larger but more static armies. His choice of battlefield and his audacious final encirclement maneuver became textbook examples of how strategy and boldness can overcome an overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Yarmouk demonstrated the superiority of mobile warfare and unified leadership over brute force and a divided command. The cultural and religious impact of the battle was equally profound. The loss of Jerusalem and the other holy cities of Christendom to the Muslims a few months after Yarmouk was a devastating blow to the Christian world, an event that would eventually lead to centuries of conflict in the form of the Crusades. For Islam, the conquest of these lands was not only a military victory, but also a spiritual triumph, as they took control of places sacred to their own faith. The battle did not just change borders, it redrew the sacred map of the world. There is an epilogue to the story of Khalid ibn al-Walid that is as striking as his greatest victory. Shortly after the Battle of Yarmouk, the architect of the world-changing conquest was dismissed from his command. The new caliph, Umar, a pious but also pragmatic man, feared the growing fame and near worship that surrounded his undefeated general. Concerned that the Muslims might begin to put their faith in Khalid instead of in God, and perhaps wary of his political influence, Umar relieved him of his post and placed him under the command of others. The undefeated Sword of Allah, the man who never lost a battle, accepted the decision with humility and continued to serve the caliphate as a common soldier. Years later, the greatest field general of his time died quietly in his bed in the city of Homs. Legend has it that on his deathbed, surrounded by the countless battle scars that covered his body, he lamented not having died a martyr on the battlefield, the only honor that, in his view, had been denied him. The man who delivered an empire to his people died not in a glorious charge, but in the silence of his home, an unexpectedly peaceful end for a life of storm and steel.